here today in Manhattan at Collins, one of the world's leading experience design companies. And we're here with 4 extraordinary friends to have a conversation about where the future might be going. Beth Comstock, the vice chair of GE, Esther Dyson, philanthropist, tech pundit, nonprofit founder, experienced cosmonaut, Indiegogo founder Slava Rubin, a pioneer in crowdfunding movement worldwide, and finally, of course, Brian Collins. Brian, thanks so much for having us here at Collins.
Thanks for coming here to beautiful Greenwich Village.
So not only is this Greenwich Village, and I've been many times, it's one of my favorite parts of New York City, but I was inspired when I walked into Collins because it says so much about the kind of work you do, and especially when I walked into this space, this library. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about Collins. What do you do?
Well, we're an independent experience design company. We have offices in San Francisco and New York City, and soon in Los Angeles to work with our clients there. Basically, we do products, environments, and communications that help our clients imagine, create, and get ahead of get ahead of the future.
So part of that imagining and creating undoubtedly is this space we're in right now, this library.
Yeah,
now, I'm a lover of books.
Yeah.
Clearly you are, or somebody at this company is.
I am.
So tell us about this space. What's going on
Well,
here?
so my career started because I got a book when I was 10 years old on what was called the Pushpin Studios from a friend of my father's who was an architect. And that book opened the top of my head. And that summer of when I was 10 on a town in Cape Cod, I discovered all of the Wizard of Oz books written by Frank Baum. And so I went and I discovered that the movie was not the end of the story. Dorothy actually goes back and she had 14 other adventures, and I read all of them that summer. So I, in the process of, so that summer, I was not only on Cape Cod, but I was also in the land of Oz, and I was also reborn as a child of a library.
In some ways, Cape Cod is the land of Oz.
Well, it is. Oh, yeah, it's beautiful there. But by living in those books when I was 10 years old, I was reborn as as someone who was a child of libraries. And so books aren't just books; they're rocket ships. I mean, they can take you anywhere. They literally sort of take you to information that you've never seen before, but also to Mars, to Oz, to history, to almost discover anything.
Anyway,
Yeah.
well, speaking of a spaceship or rocket ship taking you to Mars,
Sure.
There's one story that I need you to tell, and it has to do with this piece of equipment. If we could have Starship Enterprise.
Yeah, here we go.
Now, this is
my library has lots of things, including
this is the original Starship Enterprise, isn't it, from the Star Trek of the 1960s?
Yeah, this is NCC 1701. This is a direct result of John Kennedy's ambition at Rice University to say we will go to the moon.
So
he changes everything, and including American television.
This has pride of place here in your library.
Yeah,
why is that?
Well, because it's an optimistic view of the future. I think you can live your life, one of two ways. You can either look at it as the result of the past, or you can look at your life as the cause of the future. And Star Trek is a really optimistic view of tomorrow. In the 1960s, there was a sense that the golden era wasn't behind us, but it was ahead of us. Yeah. And so television shows like Star Trek, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, all these sort of science fiction shows were incredibly optimistic views of the future. They also said that the future could be designed and was within reach. So for me as a kid, these things were dreams, and then we basically lived themselves. We've lived into this future. Much of the technology that was embodied by the USS Enterprise is actually real now.
So what's the most important thing that you learned from being, over the years, a fan of Star Trek?
Optimism. That in the face of adversity, in the face of difficulty, optimism is the most powerful thing that you can have. My definition of design is hope made visible. And so as designers, by definition, we have to be optimistic, because everything we create is going to live in the future. And Star Trek, for me, was an example of a tangible future that people could actually see themselves into.
So who's better, Captain Kirk or Captain Jean-Luc Picard?
I have a heart for Captain Kirk, but his sort of sexism is a little backwards.
Yeah.
But if I wanted to get on a spaceship with somebody, it would be Picard.
Because you'll probably get there.
Be able to get there, and I can hear, he could probably do a good soliloquy from Hamlet along the way.
Great. Engage.
Engage.
So this library and that spaceship is a reflection of you personally, a reflection of Collins more generally. But you have here at Collins another reflection of you that is, in a sense, precise reflection of you. If we could have the Muppet.
Yeah, I will do that in just a second. So I guess one of the things about this library is we want to fill it with so many. See this as America offline. So there's so many things here that are not on Pinterest, that's not online. There are books, there's architecture, there's books on history, philosophy, mythology, painting, architecture. We have all the issues of Art and Architecture magazine, which was a crucial magazine around the formative years of American modernism. So those kinds of things for young people to come into a library like this and just discover stuff is incredible. But in addition to books, we also have artifacts. And one of the things that we did when we won, we were invited to the Jim Henson exhibition.
Right.
When we won that, and we were thrilled to do that because
it was a beautiful work that your firm did.
Yeah, I was thrilled with
Really
it,
exciting.
and because Henson was an amazing innovator and always at the frontier of new technologies and new ways of entertaining. Particularly when it came to education, his influence in Sesame Street continues to this day, and his influence, and even there's a new television show series on Netflix based on the Dark Crystal. But when we won that, my team was so thrilled, they turned around and they gave me this. So it's one thing to kind of work on the Muppets, and then it's another thing entirely
To be one.
to become a Muppet. So I don't know if you can get this.
He's not going to be able to see
he's not
very
gonna,
well.
Yeah, but
There we go.
this is Brian. This is Brian Puppet, and so so we created him. So if you want to, you can continue the rest of the interview.
So, real Brian, does the Puppet Brian have an AI system? Does it respond the way you would
No, it
to
just
situations?
perhaps it does, but for the most part, he's a little bit less high maintenance than I am. But he occasionally knows what he's doing.
So one of my good friends, Beth Comstock, likes to say, what you really need is someone who can tell you things you don't want to hear. What is one thing, Brian 2, that you think that Brian 1 really needs to hear?
Oh, that's
No, this is for the puppet. Give him
okay.
the stage.
Then,
It's
okay,
not
then
all
the
about
stage.
you,
Well,
Brian.
okay. Well, let me. I have to ponder that for just a
Okay,
second.
fair enough.
So the puzzle that I think that any creative person sort of faces is to make sure that their passion and what they love doing is not doesn't overwhelm the logic and the sense of discipline that you need to do to get things out the door. Brian will blow stuff up at the very last minute if he doesn't like it or if he doesn't think it's as good as it should be, and that can sometimes be frustrating.
Brian 2, how does that make you feel?
It makes me feel fine because I'm not Brian. I'm just his puppet.
Do you ever feel like Brian has his hand up your?
Now I think
Okay.
this is where we're going to stop that conversation right now. No, we won't go any further with that. We're done making that. We're done making that.
So, Brian, this is great. I can't wait to get to the conversations. How about we have a seat and chat a little more?
That sounds great. I'd love that. Thanks.
Thanks. The first time we met Brian, I think it was outside Venice at H Farm, maybe 4 years ago.
Yeah.
You introduced yourself as the man with two right brains,
Yeah.
which, aside from the physics of that, what does that mean?
Well, it was an excuse, I think, for why I was at the World Economic Forum one year. I was introduced on a panel as the person at Davos that year that had two right brains. They were fascinated by design that year. I think Davos was kind of occupied with a lot of left brain sort of analytical thinkers, and they were interested in bringing sort of right brain thinkers, and I seemed to be emblematic of that ambition. Right brain thinkers tend to look at the world creatively. You know, a little bit, they're able to see new patterns in abstractions, in chaos. I think as a creative person, I'm very comfortable living in the unknown, and that's where I think a lot of creative people like to live.
And there are clearly people who thrive under some level of uncertainty.
Yeah.
You put people who desire uncertainty into a certain setting. It's a soul-sucking experience. But on the other hand, when you have a firm, when you have objectives and clients to serve and timelines to hit and all of this, how do you balance that? The creativity, having lots of right brain work going on around here,
Sure.
but then actually making things happen.
Sure. Well, like any creative discipline, it requires two sort of values, and they're constantly in dialogue with each other. One is you have to have incredible creativity, which is deeply related to passion, which is about experimentation, abstraction, invention, serendipity. And the other side is you have to have strategy, which is basically discipline, which is about structure, making sure things get done on time, strategy, information, making sure you're making the correct judgments. So those two things are always in dialogue, and if you don't have them both in dialogue, you might have great creative work, but it won't get out the door. If you don't have creativity, you might have great discipline, but what gets out the door is dull and isn't interesting. So those creativity or passion and discipline always have to be in play.
Passion and discipline. I always like to think of discovering the future in terms of the discipline it requires to be strategically unfocused.
Sure.
Because people become so focused in what it is today, and they're worried about the current quarter, they don't even take the time to do the unurgent stuff of looking out 3 years or 5 years or 10 years.
Yeah.
So they don't even open their mind to the possibility.
Yeah, or even like Chinese culture looking at 50, 100, 200 years.
200 years.
Yeah, which they're able to really anticipate and really look into the future. And I think, given the sort of short-term measurements that many businesses are under, it becomes very difficult for them to try to anticipate and get ahead of the future. What we do here is try to figure out what that future is going to look like, imagine it, help create it, and work with our clients to help push them into that future so they can get ahead of it quickly.
So what's an example? It's one thing to say you get a brief from a client, go out and try and do this and figure this out for us, and to take your creative people, the members of your network, to go out and generate some exciting output. It's another thing to then take it and work with clients and work with people who have to hit quarterly projections, et cetera.
Sure.
How do you bring them along and engage them in this creative process?
Well, it's like really good creative process. It's done in conversation and it's done in dialogue. One of the things I would sometimes ask friends of mine who worked at Apple, I said, "Do you ever see Steve Jobs when he was alive?" They said, "Yeah, we see him all the time." Well, where is he? He's in the cafeteria talking to Johnny Ive all the time. And if I go back and I take a look at the history of creativity, the people who lead creativity in the world's leading companies are always in dialogue with the people who are creating the future. So we need to, first of all, be really good conversationalists about what that future is going to be. A few years ago, we were asked by Spotify to help them reimagine what their future is going to look like. They had grown exponentially. They're incredibly popular. They had kind of tapped out all their early adopters and all their interfaces and all their sort of their language and how they spoke about music looked like it was designed by an incredibly successful engineering culture.
Right.
But it didn't look like and behave like music, and they wanted to scale. They didn't want to look and appear like a tech company. They wanted to be music. So we spent a lot of time talking to them about what that was. First of all, they made a great product, but they didn't look and behave and act like they were part of the music community.
What they were.
But they were.
Yeah.
They looked like an engineering company, and yet they had incredible music, the best music streaming service in the world. But for people who did not necessarily know that, they didn't look like music. So we spent a lot of time with them actually looking at the past. Who else in the history of music sort of was a very celebrated brand, yet also sort of advanced, the community of music? And we looked to San Francisco, and we looked at a club there called the Fillmore West, which basically invented psychedelic posters.
Wow.
And so we looked at them, and we looked, how could we create that kind of energy, that kind of imagination, that kind of passion, and bring that to a brand like Spotify? So they would behave and look and feel like music, and support musicians, and support people who love music, and support that whole community. And so we basically brought them to the history of the connection between music and art. And when they looked at that, they said, well, that's something. And so sometimes by looking at the past to figure out how problems have been solved before, we can actually anticipate and create how problems might be solved in the future.
Well,
it's one of the reasons why we have this library.
This library.
Yeah.
In a sense, as human beings, we only have the opportunity to look to the past to try and figure out where we're going in the future, because we can't directly see the future. but we can affect it. We can decide which directions we want to nudge the future in. What are some things you do here at Collins and with your clients and in your own life to inspire those avenues to the future?
Well, you can look at your life, basically, I think, two ways. You can see it either as a result of what came before, or you can see it as a cause of what might happen. So, and in many ways, I think brands are, one of the reasons I love working with brands and companies is I think brands are the mentors of things to come.
Say that again?
Brands are the mentors of things to come.
And what do you mean by mentor of things to come?
They help us anticipate, create, and push us into the future. And the best brands do that. Certainly the most celebrated, most famous technology brands do that, but other brands do that.
In the sense that they suggest to the people in the company what this could be in the future. They suggest to the customers, the consumers, what to expect and what to feel about interactions with the company, or and go further into that.
They help us dream, first of all. So brands that we're familiar with are the first thing they do is inspire trust. And if you already trust a brand, and you have some kind of relationship with it, then you can help. Then they can help you anticipate what that future might be, and they can help you imagine what your role in that future might be. You know, Amazon started off as a bookseller online. Now they're moving into entertainment, technology, and what I think that will change everything.
Grocery.
Groceries, sure. They just bought Whole Foods, and they're introducing what I think will be the most powerful and disruptive technology, which is voice-based. Protocols, interfaces. It'll change everything, and so then people have followed Amazon every step of that way, because they've given Amazon extraordinary trust. So they'll follow the path that Amazon.
So how do you see voice?
A lot sort of plays out for them.
Everybody's talking about voice interfaces today, and obviously we have your Alexas in your series, and it's fun to confound them sometimes, but they're getting better.
Oh yeah.
So you see this as one of the most profound developments of the next 3-5 years. Why is that? What do you see on the horizon as a result of voice that we couldn't do before?
I think what it does, it will. The first thing it's going to do is sort of limit our choices. I was speaking at a conference last week in Atlanta, and I asked 15 people in the room, name me something that you're going to get at the grocery store. And they said, milk, eggs, yogurt, bread, nuts. 15 people. And these are people who all work in branding. Not one of them said Bounty paper towels,
interesting,
Pampers, diapers. They just said the function. And that's the way our brains think. Advertising agencies would have us say, "Oh, I want to get my Bounty paper towels," but we don't think that way.
Right.
The way we think about brands is if they're truly extraordinary, then we'll name that brand. But if they're not extraordinary, they just become generic pretty quickly. So I think what Alexa will do and voice-based sort of interfaces will do will shake out brands that are generic, because if you can be replaced easily by Amazon Basics, you're in trouble. Because if you say, I would like some paper towels, Amazon's going to say, we would suggest Amazon Basic. Would you like 6?
Yeah, right.
And they said, no. Well, would you like 2? No. And they will shift you. They might also recommend the most popular brand, but voice-based protocols will shift, I think, a lot of how brands behave.
Brian, one thing I've learned about you over the past 4 years is that you're a master storyteller.
Thank you.
And usually that's a great thing.
Yeah.
But what is your favorite story of all time? And no requirements, no restrictions, no thematic relevance, doesn't matter. Your number one favorite story.
It's a simple one. And my grandfather is from County Wicklow in Ireland, and he spoke with a very thick brogue. I'm going to try to mimic it. It's going to be terrible. But I was about 11, 12 years old. I had grown up with his stories, and my grandmother's stories, also from Ireland, about banshees and spirits in the other world, in the fairy world. And I said, Grandfather, do you really, really believe in leprechauns? And he said, Brian, do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I'm nuts? Of course I don't believe in leprechauns. I said, yeah. But they're there anyway. So when you're 12 years old and your grandfather tells you that story, for me, it was the kind of story that embodies for me why I love Ireland so much. It has one foot in the pragmatic, but it also has one foot in the fantastical. And for me, that's always been a great way, in my mind, to sort of to live your life, to be open to something magical, to be open to something fantastical, which is what my grandfather was.
A place for magic in the world. In fact,
Yeah.
I'll be with a group in Ireland next week.
Yeah.
I very much look forward to it. One thing I experienced there, the first time I went, people really do wink.
They do wink.
And it says to you, I'm pulling your leg, and this is a joke we've got together.
Yeah, it's a place that's filled with enchantment all the time, where the real world and the magical world sit side by side, and sometimes they overlap. And that story that my grandfather told me is emblematic of that.
Well, Collins is definitely a place where magic coincides with reality.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.